Good morning, guys. How y'all doing today? We're going to look at chapter 18, trying to wrap it up here. We're about to wrap up the semester. So bear with me. I'm fixing to share my screen, chapter 18, which is a really interesting chapter on origin and history of life. Okay, can y'all see? Y'all can see the screen? All right. Now, one of my things I always like to say before we get started on this one as we go into this, one of the key principles of science is that we be able to do an experiment and be repeatable, right? And so, it since we're here, okay, let's assume we are here. We're not in some kind of TV dream sequence, some series on dream sequence. So we're here, and so how we got here is a great question. Okay, but the problem is if, and I'm assuming life did start on Earth at some point, and we are descendants of that life. How that first life came about, to me, it's got to be one of the most fascinating things in biology, and it's probably a one-time event, very likely. Hopefully, So, and we have not been able to repeat that in the laboratory. So, a lot of this chapter is theoretical stuff that we are suggesting, or people are making hypothesis about. Okay, and remember that's not a theory or law yet; it has to be repeatable. Okay, so as we go through this, so it's a pretty interesting chapter, I think. But it can be it kind of freak some people out. Okay, so we're going to look at some of the possible origins of life, the history of life on Earth, based on the fossil record, and then the geological factors that influence evolution. Okay, so we're going to use a term here, and I'm looking at the book on page 317, a term for the last universal common ancestor, or LUCA. Is in other words, what is the last common ancestor to all living organisms on Earth? Okay, that's what it's talking about. So life only comes from life. So the molecules of living organisms called biomolecules or organic molecules have to form. And somehow those molecules then give rise to a living cell. And I think that's the part that we can't explain at all, I think, as we see. So this field of the origin of life involves chemistry, evolutionary biology, paleontology, microbiology. We'll define paleontology, study fossils in a few minutes, and other branches of science to help develop hypotheses about the life's origin. Okay? So what we do know, looking using radiocarbon dating, we'll talk about in a little while, of the rocks on Earth, the oldest rocks on Earth we find are around 4.6 billion years old. So we think the Earth formed about 4.6 billion years ago, and then the Earth's mass provided a gravitational field strong enough to hold an atmosphere. Now, the primitive atmosphere on Earth. Now, one of the ways we speculate what it might be was we can actually look at the other planets in our universe, in our solar system, and we have sampled some of those. There's atmosphere on some of those. And we can also look at frozen ice that we in our Antarctica and North Pole. We can dig down and see what was in the air back as we go back in time by digging through the ice. But in the early part of the last century, it was pretty much hypothesized in the late 1800s or 1900s that most likely the primitive Earth's atmosphere consisted of water vapors, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, small amounts of hydrogen, methane, ammonia, hydrogen sulfides, and carbon monoxide, but very little free oxygen. We don't see that on any planet in the solar system except Earth. Okay, originally it was too hot for liquid water to form, so as the Earth cooled, the water vapor condensed to liquid water, and so that leads to this once again the theoretical, not the theoretical, the plan of how life might could have come about. So our book, and then the major in our book here looks at these four things that would have to happen in order for life to evolve spontaneously on its own. Now, I personally, like to think God had a little something to do with that, but sometimes that's an easy out too. Okay, so if we do discover how it happened, maybe that's the way God did it, right? So anyway, so the first stage one would be organic monomers have to evolve from inorganic compounds. So in other words, we'd have to take those 92 elements and have organic molecules form from those. Okay, and we'll see in a minute that we've pretty well done that in the laboratory. So that can happen, and that does happen. Then these organic monomers would join together to form organic polymers. Remember, polymers are many copies of the same type molecules, like amino acids sticking together to make large proteins. Well, in the laboratory, we have achieved that. Okay. In stage three, organic polymers become encapsulated in membranes to form proteocells, or this protobionts, first cells we're talking about here. Well, dadgummit, you can take fats and throw them in water and they form spheres. You can throw proteins and they form spheres. So we probably have achieved stage three in the laboratory somewhat with some degree of success. Now, here's the big one. Okay, this is the drum roll. The probionts or the proteal cells acquire the ability to self-replicate. Because see, to be a living organism, you must be able to acquire energy and use that energy to make ATP to do your cellular work, but then you have to replicate your DNA and replicate yourself. Well, we haven't done that in the laboratory yet. Okay, so we haven't created life in the laboratory, but we've gotten kind of close. Okay, so stage 4, we haven't been able to do that yet. So we're going to go through these kind of quickly and have a little fun with this. And I probably won't get to talk a lot about this in lecture for this 13 weeks. I always like having a little fun with that. It's always interesting to me. Okay, so here it is laid out another way graphically, and let's take a look at it. My little cursor, let's start at the bottom. Early Earth, inorganic chemicals are already, that's what makes up Earth. Energy from the sun, ultraviolet radiation, all these things could have led to the small organic molecules forming. That's stage 1. Then they could polymerize. That's stage 2, and we've seen that before. And then that proteocell forms with the development of a plasma membrane of sort. And now here's the part where it gets crazy. We got to get that DNA and RNA in there. And there's a big debate. We'll see that about what came first, DNA and RNA. Huge debate, but all that has to get in the cell, and shazam, it self-replicates and it's alive. So we haven't crossed that threshold of creating life in the laboratory yet. But once that cell forms, then we have these extinct lineages, and then we have that last common ancestor leading to the prokaryotes and the archaeobacteria and the eukaryotes, us down one of these lines. Once again, that step to living is one that we haven't been able to do in the laboratory yet, in my opinion. Okay? No, not my opinion. Factually, it hasn't been done, or we've done published it. So real quick, she kind of goes through this. This is in your book on page 318, 319. She's got a pretty good page or two here on the evolution of monomers. Comets and meteorites, perhaps carrying organic chemicals, may have pelted Earth throughout history. That could have been the seed of organic molecules needed to get to chemical origin of life on Earth. Bacterium-like cells have also been carried to Earth on meteorites or comets. So maybe we talked about this in lecture, that we're all descendants of Martians. Life may have started on Mars, and a comet or meteorite may have brought it to us that way. The monomers came from reactions in the atmosphere, and this is first suggested in the early 1900s by Operon and Halden, and they suggest organic molecules could be formed in the presence of outside energy sources using atmospheric gases. We also see monomers could form from reactions at hypothermal vents. I think one of the more interesting things is when we went to Mars in the 70s, this was before the thermal vents had been discovered. So where do we land on Mars to look for life or whatever? We land in the freaking desert, like Sahara Desert. Gee, we didn't find any life there, okay? Because we thought, Earth life probably formed on some ocean edge of the ocean here on Earth. But more likely, the first living organism on Earth were in these thermal vents, as we'll see a picture in just a minute coming up. There's the thermal vents with a plume of hot water rich in iron nickel sulfides, and they're living organisms or critters. There's the eco living off of that. So they're autotrophs taking energy from that heat, living off that heat. Pretty cool. Okay, and so Stanley Miller and Harold Urey in 1953 conducted an experiment to test this Operon-Halden hypothesis that organic molecules could spontaneously form. And they put a glass apparatus with methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water in it, and fired shock electricity through it to represent lightning, and they were able to then see that this ocean of organic soup formed. Here's their experiment, and then they had a condenser and boiling water represent the molten lava of the Earth, hot. And when they did this, the organic molecules were found. Okay, long story short. So we know that they happened here, and then this has been repeated many, many times. So basically, the building blocks of organic molecules can spontaneously form, and we have proven that. And then the next step then was well, how does this happen? Well, and if we take a look, one of the theories was this iron sulfur world hypothesis suggests organic molecules react with amino acids to form peptides in the presence of iron. That would be the thermal vents would be a good place to do that. Protein first hypothesis assumed that protein enzymes first and then DNA came later. And then there was a big push about the RNA first hypothesis. Maybe the RNA came first, okay? And some really good stuff in here, including the extraterrestrial origin hypothesis. And I have some short answer questions on that these are answered on 318, 319. RNA first hypothesis kind of neat because viruses are broken into those that inject DNA into you and those that inject RNA. And RNA can be an enzyme. So, and of course, there's that reverse transcriptase enzyme that can make DNA from RNA. So there's some strong evidence that maybe RNA came first. Then how did this first proteocell come about? Well, you can put proteoids or small polypeptides that you can put in water and they'll form spheres. They'll form these microspheres, and then lipids placed in water form cell-sized double-layer bubbles called liposomes. So we can make cell membranes abiotically in a non-living environment. Here's kind of what have that single hydrophobic fatty acid tail. Okay, and here's some of those microspheres. Okay, showing how they form. So the first protocell would have to carry on nutrition, get food in, and make ATP. And so they could have been chemosynthetic autotrophs at the thermal vents, which would be protected by UV and ultraviolet radiation. So we probably think life now evolved at those thermal vents, not on the surface near the puddle of the edge of a lake somewhere. Okay, they're going to have energy to make ATP, and how ATP evolved is another one. Because remember, all living cells use ATP. Glycolysis had to evolve very early, since everybody does glycolysis. Some of the origins here, jumping into this, going more into this self-replicating system, RNA first. There's a lot of evidence on that one. There are a lot of people leaning toward that one. Our protein first. I'm not going to make a big deal about those, but you can look at those as a cool theme on how the meteorites bring a phosphorus-rich element, and that may have been a key to getting life forming. But once again, a lot of these to me are just up to that, up to this, where we get to the history of life. Before that, are just hypotheses on how it all came about, and none of them have been proven yet. The last one being evolution of a self-replicating system, and you just look at those, and those are hypotheses. But let's look at things we do know. Fossils are the remains and traces of past lives, and they fossilize better if they have a hard bone or skeleton. Okay, paleontology is the study of fossils, and fossils are traces of organisms embedded in a sediment. Sediment is produced by weathering and erosion of rocks. Sediment becomes a recognizable stratum and a stratigraphic sequences. The strata of the same age tend to contain the similar fossils. Those are called index fossils, can be found all over the earth, and they can be used for relative dating. This helps geologists determine relative dates of embedded fossils despite upheavings and other, earthquakes and movement of this. And here's a good picture just showing you, we've all drove by the highway somewhere and seen the different colorations in the rock, and that is due to different sedimentation at different times. And it goes without saying, the farther down we go, the older it is that it was that layer was laid down. Here's a little biological clock. If Earth is a 24-hour period, man did not appear at 11:59 in the 59 seconds. So we were here in the last second. If the whole history of Earth, our life of the universe is one day, 24 hours. Now that's pretty cool. So you look at that. So oldest known rock, oldest fossil, first proteocell, first photosynthetic organism, first oxygen in the atmosphere, oldest eukaryote, oldest multicellular, land plants, age of dinosaurs. Kind of a cool little graph starting here, formation of Earth, and we just appear at 11:59. So we do know that in the fossil record. One of my terms here that we talked about this relative dating is where the fossil, what strata the fossil is found in. We can date the stratum in geology based on those index fossils. That's pretty cool. Here are some of those index and fossils. Here is a dinosaur footprint, obviously a fish. I actually have bring a trilobite to lab today, which is extinct microorganism. I bought this one for like $80, I don't know, 20 years ago. Here's a fossilized fish and a fern, so we do know these things existed. Now, absolute dating assigns an actual date to a fossil when it died. On absolute dating method, it relies on radioactive dating technique using usually radioactive carbon-14, which decays to nitrogen-14 at a known half-life. The half-life is the amount of time it takes for half of the carbon-14 to become nitrogen-14. That number is actually 5,730 years, and Libby won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for this discovery in 1949 that the half-life of carbon-14 is 5,730 years. Okay? Now, the length of time required for that, we talked about that. But here's the point I'm reading from the book here. This means that half-life of carbon-14 in organic matter decays to 19 in that period of time. All living organisms have in them about the same ratio of C12 to C14. So the absolute date of a fossil can be determined by comparing the C12 to C14 of a fossil to that of a living organism. So once you die, you don't bring any more. Once you're fossilized, you don't bring any more C14 in. So then you look at the ratio of C14 to nitrogen 14 in that fossil, and that can be extrapolated out. And the more C14 you have, the more nitrogen you have formed, the older you are. Okay, so you can make a pretty good estimation. Now this is only good for about 100,000 years. Once you get past that, carbon-14 dating is not very accurate. But this has been used to prove, for example, back in the 80s, that a diary was found in Germany using old paper, but also the folder, and the binder were from Nazi Germany, and it was Hitler's diary. and it was and these guys got famous, made a lot of money. It was on the cover of Time magazine. They were paid millions of dollars, and then somebody radiocarbon dated the paper back to like 1950 or 1958 or 60. So you can't write on paper that was a plant in 1960 in 1928 or 1938. And so those guys were sent to German prison for fraud. Okay, and so we use this also to determine if a body is more than 50 or 60 years old. And if you go, I had a minor anthropologist. If you go to Indian dig, you're dealing with people that died 200 years old, a year ago, 200 years ago. And so, but if you find a body that's been dead 20 years, that's a murder investigated, not archaeological dig. So that, to me, that's pretty cool. So the length of time required for the half atoms to change is known, and we can look for that and compare those ratios. Okay, so that gives us some pretty good idea. So the geological time scale then has been divided. The history of Earth can be divided down by looking at this fossil record. Okay, I'm going to go to this. This is actually, I like to look at it backwards. So here's the very bottom of it down here. This is the second one. This is in your book on page 325, and I'm looking at the bottom. Actually, I'm not even to the bottom yet. It's 3 lines. So Earth formed 4,500 million years ago, or 4.57 billion years ago. Because remember, 3,500 first prokaryotic cell, 3,500 million years ago, or 3.5 billion. Okay, and then we have fossils. We have pictures of that, and we'll show it to you in a minute. Oxygen accumulates on Earth 2.7 billion years ago. First eukaryotic cells formed 2.1 or 2,100 million or 2.1 billion. Protista, 1 billion years ago. First soft-bodied invertebrate 630 million years ago. Marine algae flourish. Non-vascular land plants appear. That's the first plants on land appear 443 million years ago. Seedless vascular plants appear 416. First seeded plants 359. I'm going back. Then we got look at the Paleozoic, the Carboniferous period 209 million years ago. Age of great coal-forming forests of ferns, club moss, horsetails, big as any trees we have. They die. They become coal. When they become fossilized, so our coal, our fossil fuel coal, is the remains of these Carniferous period plants. Amphibians diversify. Reptiles appear. Then we have a decline in those. Gymnosperm, remember those are our pine trees and they're evergreens, right? And then conifers appear 200 million years ago. First mammals appear. First dinosaurs appear. Coral, mollusks dominate the sea. And then 145 million years ago, flowering plants appear. Dinosaurs flourish. Matter of fact, this is Jurassic period, right? I mean, this is the day of the dinosaurs. And then 65 million years, flowering plants spread. Conifers persist. Placenta-born mammals appear. That would be our group of mammals. Modern insect groups appear. And then we have, and notice we have something else going on here. I kind of overlooked this. Mass extinction. Look at here. An early, I went too far the wrong way, sorry. So here we go. Mass extinction here at 416 million years ago. Mass extinction here at 300 million years ago. Mass extinction here at 200, and I guess that's going to be 251 million years ago. Mass extinction here between these two, 145 million years ago, and then a mass extinction, last mass extinction, 56 million years ago, and it wiped the dinosaurs out. And look at the number of species die. And so if you look at this, we are under a significant extinction event undergo now caused by man. And notice that we appear presence of modern humans 0.01 million years ago, or what is that? That's about 10,000 years ago. Okay, something like that. If you do the math on that, that's 0.01 million. So whatever that is, move it 2 decimal places from million. So that's 10,000 years. Okay, and if hominoids and our others appear as far as ancestral primates, human-like organisms here at 2.6 billion or 260 million years ago. But anyway, you can look at the plant life and then animal life. And so I see a trend here of mass extinction that we're kind of overdue when we had a big one in like 56 million years. And maybe, actually, I think it's more like 65 million years ago when that occurred. So anyway, neat little story here, story of life on Earth. Okay, and they kind of look at some of the highlights here, and I'm not going to go over all these, but we just kind of hit most of them here. Prokaryotes appeared 3.5 billion years ago. Here's a cool picture with a time factor on it. So the first cell, that first proteocell, then bacteria formed, archaeobacteria formed, and we know we're kin to them, so we're an offshoot of those. Okay, and then you got the aerobic bacteria for the synthetic bacteria. They formed the phylum, the domain bacteria. Then you have the archaeobacteria domain. But notice that this branch off of the archaeo takes in the mitochondria, and then later on, a division occurs, and plants take on another bacterium for the chloroplast. So plants and animals, and then here we have our domain eukaryotes. Okay, pretty cool. Here is a microscope picture of the stromatolites, the oldest fossils found on Earth, on these rocks off of the shore of Australia. And these are basically, we believe, the primitive cyanobacteria that could oxidize the environment. So over that time, I missed that in the time thing, that these cyanobacteria produce oxygen, and our atmosphere turns into an oxidizing environment from that early reducing environment that it had. So reducing environments would tend for things to come together. Oxidizing for things tend to fall apart. Okay. All right. And so once again, here we go. Talks about the endosymbiotic theory, how that mitochondria and chloroplast came into being. Very cool. 1.4 billion years ago, first multicellular. Here's another fossil of some of this. The Paleozoic era lasted 300 million years. This is when we have all those great forests, we'll see here in a minute, that become our coal. Here's some more sea life of the Cambrian period. Okay, then we had the land invasion 500 million years ago. And here's a picture on the left of these forests, of these great trees that became our coal. There was some, here is our current dragonfly. Here's one with like a 3 feet wingspan, okay, that occurred during that Carboniferous period. Then the Mesozoic period with the Jurassic period and the Triassic period. Jurassic period where the dinosaurs achieved enormous size and were the dominant animals of the time. Then they declined, and then we see the adaptive radiation of the mammals. Here are some pictures based on the fossils. I was telling y'all the other day, if you ever get out in Utah, go to Dinosaur National Park, and they have the dinosaur bones you can look at. You can actually touch them there. You walk in the front door, they have a femur there. It's about 5 foot tall that you can go touch of a dinosaur femur. Pretty cool. Then it goes on. Here just kind of talks about the evolution there. And then we had the woolly mammoths and all of that period. Then they disappear. What is some of the factors that could have influenced evolution? Continental drift. We know the continents are spreading out. We know that at one time all the continents were together, and this is due to plate tectonics. We know back around 250 million years ago, Pangea was all the land masses together, and then this Gondwana here, where South America and Africa were together, right? And then they all separated out to this present day. And we know that these are still moving. So the continents are still moving. We've measured that, and we see that happening. And I guess one of the other cool ones here is there was a mass extinction occurred at the following points. It's 444 million years ago, 75% of species disappeared. Debian period, 360 million years ago, 70% of marine invertebrates disappear. Permian period, 251 million years ago, 9% of all species disappear. Triassic period, 200 million years ago, 60% of all species disappear. And then 66 million years ago was the last one that killed 75% of all species on Earth. So we have a history of at least, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mass extinctions, one now being caused by the humans, okay, which the first time an animal or an organism in the group caused it. And if you look at that time period, we're kind of due for another one. And we think most of these were caused by a comet coming in, or a meteorite hitting Earth and throwing us into what they call a nuclear winter, okay, and wiped out all the big predators, big animals, okay. Here's another one showing all the land masses together and how the fern distribution occurs. So we see those fern plants on all those continents. Here's a cool picture, another one kind of laying it all out here at the time, looking at those 5 mass extinctions at the bottom and the percent of species that disappeared. Also notice that the thicker here shows how many species of mammals, birds, insects. So these are the big 3 that have blown up in this last 200 million years, right? Look at that. And then here's some that disappeared, right? Including the trilobites are gone, okay, and peripheras and others are a little bit on the decline. So a pretty cool picture here of the history of Earth. Anyway, not going to go crazy about this little chapter. We got short answer questions. There shouldn't be a whole lot of that on the final, but I do like that period of looking at, and I think that we are due for a mass extinction, right? So maybe we should spend a little bit of NASA money watching for that next comet or meteorite that's going to take us out, right? Maybe we can pull the Armageddon and blow it out, right? Blow it up before it gets here. Anyway, y'all have a good day, and we'll stop on that one. Thank y'all for paying attention today.